The train let out a long, aching whistle as it slowed against the stretch of dusty plains. Its iron wheels ground to a halt, hissing steam into the evening air, and the noise of departing passengers filled the platform. Clara tightened her grip on the worn leather handle of her suitcase, the only belonging she carried across the ocean. She stepped down carefully, her polished boots crunching against the wooden planks, and for a moment she stood there quietly, taking in the sight of a place she had only imagined in her letters. The town was small, smaller than she expected, with a single stretch of shops, wooden fronts with peeling paint, swinging signs that creaked against the prairie wind. Dust rose in swirls as wagons rattled by, and people moved slowly, with the unhurried pace of those who had long grown used to this quiet life. Yet when their eyes fell on her, Clara could feel their curiosity. A few women whispered behind their gloved hands, some men tipped their hats politely, while others glanced with the kind of judgment reserved for strangers who did not belong. Clara straightened her posture, clutching the folds of her plain dress, though her heart beat wildly in her chest. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times during the long voyage. How he would be waiting for her at the platform, how he might smile shyly, remove his hat, perhaps even offer his hand. She had imagined his eyes lighting up, not because she was beautiful, but because she had come, because she had chosen him. But the platform slowly emptied. Passengers found their loved ones. Greetings echoed in the air. Children ran into the arms of their mothers, and couples reunited. With laughter and embraces, one by one, people left until the bustle quieted down. Clara was still standing there alone, her suitcase at her side. She tried to calm the rising panic by reminding herself of all the reasons she had come. She had no family left in the city. She had called home, no real prospects, no future that wasn't filled with loneliness. She had answered an advertisement out of desperation and hope, an advertisement placed by a widowed farmer who lived thousands of miles away, a man who had lost his wife and was searching for a partner to help him raise his little girl. The letters he had written were few but thoughtful. His words were rough, unpolished, but there was sincerity between the lines. He had spoken of needing someone steady, someone patient, someone who could bring warmth into a home that had grown cold since his wife passed. Clara had reread those letters so many times that she could still recall the exact phrasing. She had convinced herself that perhaps fate had whispered to her through those simple words. And yet, as the shadows lengthened and no one came forward to greet her, the doubt grew heavier. What if he had changed his mind? What if he had seen her photograph and decided she wasn't enough? Too plain, too fragile looking, too much of a burden. What if this entire journey was a mistake, another cruel reminder that she was unwanted? The Tiaozuma suitcase felt heavier as she dragged it toward a bench, her gloves trembling against the handle. She sat, folding her hands neatly on her lap as she tried to keep her composure. Her throat ached with the effort not to cry. Crying here, in front of strangers, would only draw more stares, and she already felt their eyes on her. The whispers behind her back stung. She must be one of those mail-order brides, she imagined them saying. Come all this way just to be stood up. Minutes stretched into an hour. The sun slipped lower in the sky, painting the horizon with strokes of gold and rose, but the beauty of it did not soothe her. Her back grew stiff, her body weary from days of travel, but her heart was heavier than all of it. She wondered what she would do if he never came. She had no family to turn back to, no money to waste on another long journey. This had been her one chance to belong somewhere, to start anew. She thought of the letter she had written to him before she boarded the ship, a letter filled with trembling hope. She had written that she was not perfect, that she was not beautiful like the women in magazines, but she was steady and faithful. She had promised that if he welcomed her, she would give all of herself, to his home, to his daughter, to him. She had folded that letter with care, kissed it as if it carried a piece of her heart, and sent it away, believing he would be waiting. But now, with each passing moment, that belief crumbled. The platform grew quieter. The last few stragglers left, and soon Clara was the only one sitting there. The loneliness wrapped around her like a cruel embrace, pressing on her chest until she could hardly breathe. She stared at the wooden planks beneath her feet, trying to summon strength, but the thought pounded in her mind. He doesn't want me. I came all this way for nothing. Her eyes lifted to the horizon once more, hoping, praying that perhaps she had misjudged, that perhaps he was still coming. But deep down, she felt the sting of rejection already settling in her heart. And in that quiet, fading light, Clara could not shake the truth that she feared most. She was unwanted, just as she had always been. The low sun dipped toward the horizon, staining the sky with deep shades of orange and violet. The platform creaked beneath Clara's boots as she shifted restlessly, her suitcase still at her feet, her posture weary but still composed. The ache in her heart had settled into something heavier than disappointment. It felt like abandonment. She kept her eyes lowered, afraid that if she looked up again, she would only meet the pitying glances of strangers, and then she heard it. The sound of boots against the wooden planks. Slow, deliberate steps. She looked up. A tall man was walking toward her from the far end of the platform. His frame was broad, his shoulders square from years of work in the fields, and his clothes bore the marks of a life lived outdoors, dust on his boots, a shirt faded by the sun, hands browned and calloused. His face was rough but not unkind, his jawline strong, shaded by a day's stubble. What struck Clara most were his eyes. They were tired eyes, shadowed with burdens, but beneath that weariness flickered something deeper, kindness, perhaps, or pain. He stopped a few paces away, pulling off his hat. His voice, when it came, was deep and uncertain. "Miss Clara?" Clara rose quickly, brushing her skirts nervously. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." For a moment, they simply looked at one another. She had traveled halfway, across the world to stand here before him, and yet in his silence she felt as though she were being measured, weighed, and perhaps found wanting. He shifted awkwardly, holding his hat in his hands. I wasn't sure you'd come." Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles, though it trembled. "I wasn't sure you'd be here." The words lingered between them, heavier than the prairie air. His jaw tightened as though guilt had taken hold of him. In truth, Ethan had not meant to leave her waiting. The advertisement he had placed months ago had been a desperate act, born from sleepless nights and the cries of a daughter who missed her mother. He had not thought much would come of it, yet here she was, flesh and blood, standing before him with hopeful eyes. And he, seeing her now, felt an unease he had not anticipated. Clara lowered her gaze, reading the hesitation in his posture, in the way he avoided her eyes. Her heart began to sink again. He doesn't want me. He regrets sending for me. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Finally, she forced a small, fragile voice. If you've changed your mind." "I understand." His eyes shot up to hers, and for the first time there was something raw in his gaze. He opened his mouth, but no words came immediately. His throat felt tight. How could he tell her the truth? That he was afraid, not of her, but of himself. Afraid that no woman could ever fit into the hollow his wife had left behind. Afraid that this stranger standing before him would see the grief carved into his bones and flee, leaving him and his daughter abandoned all over again. He began, but the words caught. He looked away, staring at the dusty horizon as though it might give him strength. Clara stood still, her fingers twisting nervously around the handle of her suitcase. She had endured many humiliations in her life, but this one threatened to break her. She had come so far, placed all her hope into this chance, only to face rejection before she had even been given the dignity of trying. And then, just as the silence threatened to crush her completely, another sound reached her ears, a soft, hesitant shuffle of little feet. From behind the man's tall frame, a small figure emerged. A girl, no more than 6, peeked shyly at Clara. Her hair was the color of summer wheat, pulled into 2 uneven braids that had already loosened in the day's wind. She wore a simple cotton dress, patched at the elbows, and clutched a ragged doll against her chest. Her big blue eyes, so much like her father's, studied Clara with a gaze that was not judging, but hopeful, curious. Clara's breath caught. This must be her, the daughter Ethan had spoken of in his letters, the little girl who had lost her mother, the little soul who lived at the heart of this arrangement. Ethan turned slightly, glancing down at his daughter. His expression softened, but his hesitation lingered. He started to speak, perhaps to introduce them, but before he could, the child stepped forward on her own. The platform was quiet, the air thick with unspoken fears, and in that fragile moment, Clara felt the child's eyes pierce right through the layers of doubt that weighed on her. The little girl took another timid step, her small hand reaching out, her voice barely louder than a whisper. And though Clara could not yet hear the words, she felt something stirring, something that told her this meeting was about to change everything. The little girl's small hand tugged lightly at Clara's skirt, and when Clara looked down, she saw a pair of wide, trusting eyes gazing up at her. They were blue like her father's, but softer, filled with something Ethan's gaze no longer carried, innocence untouched by cynicism. The child clutched her ragged doll tightly against her chest, as though it were her shield, and then leaned closer, her lips parting in a whisper that seemed to carry the weight of the whole world. "Will you be my mommy?" The words were so gentle that for a heartbeat, Clara wondered if she had only imagined them. But when she saw the hope shining in the girl's eyes, trembling with both fear and longing, she knew they were real. Her heart lurched violently in her chest. She sank to her knees, her suitcase forgotten behind her, and brought her hands up to cup the child's face. Tears stung Clara's eyes. She had thought herself unwanted, cast aside before her new life had even begun. But here was this child, this little soul, asking her not for perfection, not for beauty or riches, but for love. A love Clara had been aching to give, yet had never been asked for. Her throat tightened, and her voice broke as she whispered back, "Oh, sweetheart." She couldn't finish, for her arms were already around the little girl, drawing her close. The child buried her face in Clara's shoulder, clutching at her dress as though afraid she might disappear if she let go. Ethan stood frozen. He had not expected this. His daughter stepping forward, her words so vulnerable, so brave. His chest ached at the sight. He had kept his heart closed for so long, too afraid to let another woman near the hollow his wife's death had carved. But watching Clara kneel there, her tears falling into his daughter's golden hair as she held her with such tenderness, something inside him shifted. The walls he had built began to crack. Clara pulled back just enough to look at the child again. "If you'll have me," she whispered softly, brushing a loose strand of hair from the little girl's cheek, "I'll be the best mommy I know how to be." The girl nodded eagerly, her small arms tightening around Clara's neck. It was an answer without hesitation. In her innocent heart, she had already chosen Clara. Clara kissed the girl's temple, her tears falling freely now. It had been so long since anyone had truly wanted her, since anyone had needed her, and here was this child, choosing her in the simplest, purest way. When Clara finally looked up, her eyes met Ethan's. He was still standing a few steps away, his hat clutched in his hands, his gaze locked on them. There was something raw in his expression, a mixture of pain, awe, and the faintest glimmer of hope. I didn't mean for this," he said, his voice rough, almost breaking. "When I sent those letters, I thought I was just finding help for the house. For her. I didn't think—" He stopped, shaking his head. His throat worked as though he were swallowing back years of grief. "But seeing her with you—" Clara rose slowly, the girl still holding her hand. Her voice was steady now, though her heart still trembled. "You don't need to explain. I didn't come here for riches or for comfort. I came because I hoped maybe I could belong somewhere. Maybe I could give something of myself that mattered." Her words lingered in the air, and for the first time in a very long time, Ethan felt the weight of his loneliness lift, if only slightly. He looked at Clara, really looked at her. not as a stranger who had answered his desperate ad, not as a burden or a mistake, but as a woman with courage, with gentleness, with the kind of heart that could heal what had been broken. The little girl squeezed Clara's hand and looked up at her father with a pleading smile. "Papa, can she stay?" Ethan's chest tightened. He looked between his daughter and Clara, and for the first time since his wife's passing, he let himself breathe without the ache of guilt. Slowly, almost reverently, he nodded. "Yes," he said, his voice low but certain. "She can stay." The little girl squealed softly and hugged Clara again, as though sealing the promise herself. Clara closed her eyes, holding the child close, her heart swelling with a warmth she had thought she might never feel. The sun was nearly gone now, painting the sky in shades of deep crimson and indigo. The platform, once a place of humiliation and despair, had become the place where 3 broken lives touched and began to knit together into something whole. Clara knew the road ahead would not be easy. She and Ethan were still strangers, bound, not by love yet, but by circumstance and a child's desperate wish. But as the little girl held her hand tightly, and as Ethan finally stepped closer, his eyes softer than before, Clara felt something stir inside her, a fragile, flickering hope. It was the beginning of a family, not perfect, not complete, but real. And in that moment, as the prairie wind carried the last light of day across the horizon, Clara no longer felt unwanted. She was chosen. She was needed. She was home.